Mr. Trump gave Rush Limbaugh the Purple Heart Award, and that award is for a person who displays uh, courage, a large amount of courage or heroism. Now, does anybody know who Rush Limbaugh is? Well, I'll tell you who he is. Rush Limbaugh is a conservative radio personality. He's considered conservative, ultra right wing conservative, and I have a challenge with Rush Limbaugh because he is out of balance, if you ask me. And what I mean by that is he only sees one side of the picture. He doesn't always see the other side. So I was very surprised when he was given the Purple Heart Award by the president on national TV when Mr. Trump did his State of the Union address. So, but somehow they've compared Rush Limbaugh to Naaman. So Naaman, of course, the army guard. So why do you guys see the comparison there? And Willie, Kitty, you guys can help me with this too, because I didn't see the comparison with that either. Oh, okay. Rush Limbaugh, what I also need to tell you, my wife just reminded me, he was recently diagnosed with cancer.
Cancer. Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's the comparison. And so Rush Limbaugh, he did say, and I think that's part of what drove the president to give him the Purple Heart, because despite his diagnosis of cancer, he has continued to, like him or not, he's continued to come to work every day. And, he said he's going to fight this thing and he's going to win it. So he has faith that God is going to heal him of the cancer. And Naaman had to have faith to get into that muddy water and dip himself down 7 times. I often wonder, and after the 4th time, nothing happened, if he wondered, am I really wasting my time? Sometimes we do things in the spirit of following God, and we don't always see the fruits of our labor. And sometimes it feels like we're wasting our time. But we have to just, continue to build our faith and do what God has asked us to do. And in the long run, we might not even see the outcome of our faith works. It might be when we get to heaven, something that you've done for somebody as an act of faith. They may come up to you in heaven and say, hey, you don't remember this, but on such and such a day, you did something for me. And as a result of that experience, I was turned to Jesus. So let's go to Elisha and Billy Graham. Does everybody know who Billy Graham is? Does anybody know who Billy Graham is?
I think he was a preacher.
That's right. He was an evangelist who probably brought more souls to Christ than anybody. So Billy Graham, how would he be compared to Elisha? Or why would they make the comparison?
Because you said Billy Graham, he brought a lot of people to Christ, and Elisha, he also did the same thing through his miracle works and preachings. That's
right. Thank you. Was that Michaela?
Yes.
Thank you, Michaela. Yes. And Billy Graham had a fairly calm personality. The way some of the stories in the Bible talk about Elijah, he wasn't as calm. He was very forthright in the way he talked about how they need to follow, how we need to order our lives, how during his time, how the people need to order their lives. The last one, the very last one of the things that we didn't touch on in the story was Gehazi. Gehazi was we probably ought to go back and look at the story. So I tell you what, before we talk about Gehazi, I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to go back to the lesson so everybody could see it. And because I think we have some Gehazis in our lives. And so bear with me for 1 second. when Naaman was healed, he went to Elijah and he told Elijah, you know what? I want to pay you for what you've done in terms of healing me. And how much money do you think he paid Elijah? What do you think the payment amount was? I can
Well,
tell
he
you.
wanted to pay a lot, but Elijah didn't take it.
He said, no, I'm not taking it. But Elijah's, that's right. So he didn't take it because, now, why do you think he didn't take it, Michael?
Because it was the Lord who had healed him, and it wasn't by Elijah's doing that he got healed. It was a work from the Lord.
Yeah. And I guess Elijah figured he would get his payment in a different kind of way. So I think the story says, and I can't get the video up, so I'll just read it to you. Basically, it says, Naaman was prepared to pay him a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing, which would have been worth quite a bit. So, but like Michael said, Elisha turned it down. He said, I'm not taking anything. So Elisha's servant, his name was Gehazi. And Gehazi ran up to him. He said, Elijah asked Gehazi, where have you been? He said, I haven't been anywhere. I didn't go anywhere. But he said, but Elijah said to him, Naaman's leprosy is healed. But let me see if I get this right. Gehazi said, one of Naaman's, I want to make sure I get it right, folks. Bear with me for a second because so Naaman offered the gift to Elijah. Elijah turned it down. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. And when Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down and Naaman asked Gehazi, he says, is everything okay? He says, everything is okay. That's what Gehazi said to Naaman. But there are 2 men from my master's group. They need something. They need the silver and they need the clothes. Well, Gehazi was making this story up. And so he took the silver and he took the clothes. When he went back, Elijah asked him, where have you been? He said, I haven't been anywhere. Well, Elijah, being the prophet that he was, he knew God had given him the insight as to what Gehazi had done. Basically, he took the money that Naaman had offered to Elijah, but Elijah turned it down. Well, Gehazi said, I'm not missing out on this money. So he went back and he took the money, claiming that Elijah had sent him. Well, when Elijah found out about this, he says, get away from my presence. And the leprosy that was initially on Naaman was immediately on Gehazi. And so what does that tell you? What does that tell you? Anybody? Just, I guess, the bottom line is, we really shouldn't mess with God or God's people or God, don't try to fool God. This sounds like, I think a couple of weeks ago, we had the lesson where Ananias, or the husband and wife, Ananias and Sapphira, the husband and wife, they had in the Acts of the Apostles where they were struck dead because they were trying to steal from God. So basically, don't mess with God. I think that's really what they're saying. Okay, so let me go to one last PowerPoint, and I'm going to share the screen. I thought it was. So while I'm trying to get this up, two points that the lesson was trying to make. you may think that in the case of Gehazi, he may think that he was his crime of theft, deception would not be found out, but it was found out. There's a saying, what happens in the dark ultimately comes to light. And I believe that this is the case this time around with Gehazi. So question for the group. Does anybody, they compared Gehazi to Martha Stewart. Does anybody know who Martha Stewart is? Anybody remember Martha Stewart? Most recently, she was seen with a guy by the name of Snoop Dogg. Believe it or not, they formed a bond together.
Yeah.
What an odd. Martha Stewart was, she became famous because she was I think primarily a cook, but she was also she became famous by having a television show showing people how to fix up their house, how to get bargains, but primarily cooking. But Martha Stewart, she got caught up in a scandal whereby she got information about buying stocks. You're not supposed to buy stocks with what they call insider trading information. She got some information that wasn't available to the general public. And Martha Stewart took advantage of this information and she made a lot of money. Well, they found out that she had this information that she wasn't supposed to have, and they threw Martha Stewart in jail. So in prison, not just jail, she was in prison for a couple of years. And so based on what I just told you about Martha Stewart, how was that like Gehazi? Or is there any similarity?
They took stuff that wasn't theirs
Yeah.
and used it to their advantage.
Use it to
And
their advantage.
deception. And deception.
And sometimes I think we may do things and we
They
think,
both got punished.
yeah, they did. In ways that they never thought that they would. That's for sure. They never thought they were going to get caught, but sure enough, they did. So I'm having a little bit of a challenge getting that PowerPoint to come back up. So let me just ask this question because it's getting close to closing time. In terms of pride and humility and faith, if you, I think Mr. Davis sends out the lesson every week, and I'm not sure, it sounds like some of you had a chance to review it, but if you go to Rome, on Wednesday's lesson, for this week's Cornerstone lesson, they ask a question, and they talk about typically people who are conceited people and prideful people, they're very similar. And so we have to be careful that we're not conceited, that we don't think a lot of ourselves, that we're not showy. But usually conceited people, the question is, are they usually jealous of their friends? Or are they deceiving themselves? Are conceited people, here's a question I want the group to answer. Are conceited people admired by others?
Sometimes.
Not
Yeah.
really.
Think about movie stars. Think about,
Unless if you're famous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they think a lot of themselves. Think about athletes. A lot of athletes, they think they walk on clouds. Are they in need of being humbled?
Yes.
Repeat. Yeah.
Proverbs says, go ahead, Kitty.
And look at your president too. Do you think he's conceited?
Yes.
He's got
Yes,
a lot of
very much so.
in his veins. Yeah. And the list on Wednesday, it says some of the other ways conceited people tend to demonstrate. They're glued to the mirror. They like to look at themselves in the mirror. Are they good listeners? Usually not. I think we talked about that before. Are they popular with the opposite sex? They might be. Are they insecure? That's the question. Do you think people who are conceited are insecure?
Probably. Yes.
Maybe.
Okay.
Okay.
I would say some of them are not, because they think they have it all and can't nobody tell them anything. They got the look, they got the body, and can't nobody tell them nothing. That's not being, well, that's why I say with some people, they are not insecure at all.
Yeah, matter of fact, just the opposite. They're very, I think about our president, again. You know,
Exactly.
I've never heard him ever have an expression of humility, remorse, sorrow. He's got a line for everything. But again, as I said, pride goes before a fall. And so hopefully someone will be able to get to him. Maybe our friend, Dr. Carson, can have an influence on our president to where maybe he can minimize some of his arrogance and self-debasement. There is, apologies for the phone in the background. The last thing I want to talk about was just making sure that we are if we feel like we have a measure of pride in our lives, or if our faith is weak, we just would do well just to ask God to help us to get over that prideful spirit, and ask God to put people in our lives who will point out our prideful nature, and in a kind way would help us to overcome our prideful nature. So here's the last question, and then I think we'll close out. What are some ways, aside from prayer, that we could overcome the sin of pride, the sin of selfishness, either one of those two?
Listening to others.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Try to start listening to others and what they have to say.
Listen to other people. That's a good one.
Caring for others before yourself.
Okay. I'd say getting involved in some sort of, volunteer or community service, or looking at ways that you can share things that you really enjoy. And if you happen to be blessed with, a talent, using your talent, not for your own glorification, but to lift somebody else up if they're sick, or, it might be writing a letter, it might be singing a song. It could be a number of things, but just using your talent so that someone else is blessed by it, and you're not the only one blessed by it. Kitty, I'm going to turn it back over because I think it's almost 11:15. Thank you guys for participating. I wish it could have flowed a little better, but I think once we get used to this PowerPoint on Zoom, it'll go a little bit better. But thanks for your participation this morning.
And thank you very much, Elder Span, for such a great lesson. Now it's 11:17. We're going to have the closing prayer so that we can join